Hi, my name is Dan Guzy. My presentation is the old mills of Conococheague Creek. I start my presentation with one of my favorite photos. It's a grist mill of the Worley or Minnick mill, and I like it because it shows the miller's family in front of the mill and shows a worker in one of the doors up front. The shape of the mill is pretty typical for the Conococheague area. It's 4 levels. The lower level being where the power would come in either from internal or external water wheels and later on from turbines. In front you have the 3 doors, and in those doors would come the grain. Could be wheat, rye, buckwheat, corn, oats, and the grain would be processed, milled within the mill, and out would come the product, which could be flour, cornmeal, or animal feed. To the right of the photograph, you see logs. There was a sawmill next to this grist mill. Most of your water-powered sawmills in the region were next to grist mills, so it's pretty typical. And I should note that this is a black and white picture. The black and white photographs I have are all old, and most of the subjects in them no longer exist. The color photographs I'll be showing were taken by me in the last 5 years, and as far as I know, the mills and other items in them still exist. The reference for my talk is the 3rd edition of my mill book shown here. It's available, published and made available from the Franklin County Visitors Bureau in Chambersburg. The book is essentially a guidebook for the old water power mills on Conococheague Creek, its branches and tributaries in Franklin County, Pennsylvania, and Washington County, Maryland. Altogether, there's over 100 mill sites are discussed. 83 grist mills were on these sites, 8 of which are still standing. There were 62 sawmills. Most of them were next to grist mills. 11 textile mills and 5 paper mills. But the book itself concentrates mainly on the grist mills. To present maps of these mills in my book, I broke it down into 6 geographical regions. I will show these maps here quickly in the presentation, and also will show a picture of which mills or ruins of mills still exist, as you can see. In this case, we'll start in opposite order I do in the book, and start with the mills in Washington County. And the mill that's still standing, although it's been added to, is Kemp's Mill, which is about 4 miles upstream from Williamsport. I can't talk about all the mills, so I'm going to talk about a few sample mills. And I picked one from this region as which I thought was a good example. And that was the Huyett Mill, which is like midway in this map and off of Route 40 now, where it crosses the main stem of Conococheague Creek. Every mill has its own unique story, but there are some commonalities between mills. And I picked the Huyett Mill as a good example of a grist mill because, first of all, it's pretty typical, and secondly, it has a good complete history. This first slide talks about the where, when, and who of the mill. The where part can be seen on this insert, a map from the 1877 Washington County Atlas. In it, it shows in detail. You can see upstream, you can see the dam, the head race coming from it to the mill, marked as a G mill. You can see that Huyett lived next to the mill, and then it shows the tail race going back into the creek. The mill was built about 1818, just before the Wilson Bridge over Conococheague Creek was built. The Wilson Bridge was part of the National Road extension and provided a way of getting grain there and moving things. The National Road helped move things to Baltimore. Also, the creek was on, the mill was on Conococheague Creek, so it had the Potomac Company was running then, and so you could ship flour or whatever down to Georgetown and Alexandria. The mill was in existence in various forms up to 1923 when it was torn down. It had nothing unusual about it. A lot of mills were burnt down by fires or had fatal accidents, and as far as I tell, this had none. Below here, I show the chain of ownership, and that's important because mills are often known by their owners, and the names would change as the owners change. Sometimes the mill's released, and it might be known by the miller who leased the mill. But it's good to know what the names were, and some mills had this mill only had a couple different families that owned it, but some mills had up to a dozen or more different names for the mills. This slide addresses the design and technology of the Huyett mill, which gives you the what part of the mill story. As you can see from the picture below, is a 4-level mill. Top 3 being of wood frame, the bottom being of stone. And when it was built, it had 3 water wheels, 3 runs or pairs of millstones, and also had features of an Oliver Evans style mill, which I'll explain on the next slide. Eventually, the water wheels were replaced by 3 turbines sometime before 1880. And then about 1884, roller mills replaced the millstone. So basically it was modernized in the second half of the 19th century. And by 1914, the mill started decaying. I mentioned before that George Rowe was the owner. When he bought the mill, he essentially tore it down to build an amusement park at that location. The Huyett mill was built to the Oliver Evans design. I'll explain what that is. But first, let's look to the left, and you'll see a typical Colonial grist mill. And what you'll notice in that mill is that the power from the water wheel basically just powers one thing, and that's the millstones itself. The job of cleaning grains, sifting it after it's milled, and putting it in barrels, and it was all done by manual labor. So you needed at least about 6 people in that mill to process the grain into flour. On the right is the cross section of an Oliver Evans mill, and most of those processes are now automated, driven by wooden shafts with wooden gears on them, and it looks like a big Rube Goldberg type thing, but it was a very effective and basically caught on in the country, and mills were made like this. The mills had to be larger to more levels than them, and this was a style up to say the 1860s. That's the Oliver Evans book that provided pictures that served like blueprints was first published in 1795 and was republished in different editions up to the 1860s. After the 1860s, the mills started buying machinery from other people, and so the Oliver Evans millwright basically made everything except for the millstones, but the late 19th century mills had machinery that was bought from elsewhere and was driven by belts, which were driven by pulleys on steel shafts. Those mills in the late 19th century were different than the Oliver Evans mills. This slide shows some of the features of an Oliver Evans mill. To the left are the devices that automatically moved grain, meal, flour through the plant. On the upper left there are chutes, basically use gravity to move things downward. To the right of that is elevators, which with a casing off, so you can see the scoops. Basically, you had scoops on these belts, and that would raise, flour or grain or whatever from down below to up above. And then in the lower part there, the lower left, are conveyors. Conveyors were screws inside of tubes which moved material horizontally. So you had these things are all connected to your shafts, and were moving things around automatically. when Oliver Evans, designed his mill, it was before the patent office, U.S. Patent Office was in effect. So he had to patent things through the states. He had a lot of legal problems trying to get people to pay for getting licenses and using his designs. And one of the arguments against him was that some of these devices to move things around were already in existence. The conveyors were Archimedes screws, which goes back to the Greeks, I guess. But the one thing that he invented that was unique to him is shown on the right there, and that's what's called a hopper boy. After the grain is milled into meal, the meal is when the millstones were close together, the meal was hot and wet, hot and damp. And so you had, in the old mills, you had a boy would come up, and his job was to rake the meal so that it would be break apart and dry out, and then you could sift it. You could sift it in these what they call bolting screens or whatever, and you couldn't do that if it stuck together. So Oliver Evans invented this thing to replace that hopper boy, and couldn't still call it a hopper boy. And you can see it here. It's a rake that turns revolves around and basically rakes the meal automatically. The Huyett mill was originally built with water wheels, and which were later replaced by turbines. All the early mills had water wheels, wooden water wheels, which were either external to the building, as shown in these two photographs on the left, or they had internal wheels, which weren't so easily seen. The wooden water wheels had problems with the fact that they would rot out after about 10 years. They also had freeze problems, and they didn't work so well in low water situations where you didn't have enough water to power them, and in high water situations where the mill race would back up, and that water would work against the water wheel. So in the 1870s, they introduced turbines, which were more efficient because they had curved blades. They were smaller. They didn't rot out, and they worked better in different levels of water levels. Another big change to the Huyett mill and other mills was the replacement of millstones with roller mills. To the left here, you see various millstones. They came in pairs called runs, where the top one would rotate and they were spaced apart. Grain would come down the middle and be ground, and meal would come out to the sides. The bottom one shows two different types of millstones. The one on the left there is in segments. That's made out of French quartz. It was known as a French burr wheel. The advantage of the French quartz was that it stayed sharp. It wore down, but it had these cavities in it that kept it sharp. And you want a sharp stone to slice your wheat and not crush it, because then it'll be easier to sift afterwards. So if you see ones in segments, it's a French burr. They had trouble getting larger pieces, and so these things were assembled by smaller pieces that were put together with plaster Paris between and a metal band on the outside to hold it all together. On the right bottom there is probably a domestic wheel that's of one stone, but these stones weren't as good as the quartz French burr wheels, and so they were often used for corn instead of wheat, which would corn would mess up the wheel by putting a glaze on it. So these are the two types of wheels. But in the 1880s, they invented roller mills, which had a series of cylinders inside, which would rather than taking the meal out once and going up to the hopper boy and dropping it again to mill it again, the meal again, these things did it as a one-shot thing. They had several different cylinders in it, and you'd put grain in and flour would come out. So that a lot of mills that when they invested in these roller mills, they would change their name to so-and-so roller mills, like the Cove Gap roller mill. I'm going to move on now to another region that's just upstream from the last one. This is the East Branch of the Conococheague below Chambersburg. The whole East Branch has no full standing mills left, but in this section there is the remains of the Social Island mill, which you can see here. It has the remains of 2 turbines and the foundation of that mill. I'm going to pick a mill in here as another example mill, and that's the Hamilton Mills, which is in the upper part of the map, and it was just below Chambersburg. Each mill had its own story, and to develop that story was often like solving a puzzle. You first gathered scattered pieces of information that serves as the puzzle pieces, and then you put it all together. The Hamilton Mills was a difficult puzzle to solve, and so I wasn't able to write about it in the first 2 editions of my mill book, but I think I figured it out by the 3rd edition, and in the next few slides I'll walk you through the process I used. To the right are things from T.B. Wood's 1923 paper about Franklin County mills, and that was a very helpful resource. You see the list there, that's from one of his lists. The mills were generally put in order as they went downstream, to go downstream. Sometimes he didn't have them in order, that messed me up, but in this case they were in order. The Lakeview Mill was on Commerce Street in Chambersburg. The next one, Sears Factory, was really a furniture factory, and that really wasn't a mill that I was interested in, so I didn't include that in the book. Next comes Hamilton Mills, and the only information he gives on that, it's in West Chambersburg, wherever West Chambersburg was supposed to be on the Conococheague. And then below, downstream of that, would be the paper mill, and I knew where that was, and the 2 mills below that were grist mills, which I know their location. But the question is, where exactly was this Hamilton Mills? Yeah, Wood did have a picture of it, which I show here, and so the mill actually did exist, and it was a grist mill. So one of the other useful resources was the atlases, the county atlases, and to the left here I have details from the county atlases from the Hamilton Township and from Guilford Township. Neither of those show a GM, so there's no grist mills shown in the where I thought the mill should be, but they give you some clues. And in both of the details there, you see a road coming down from Chambersburg, and then a bridge going across Conococheague Creek, and then a road going a short ways after that. So the question is, why would you have a bridge and a short road? Well, it more than likely went to someplace important like a mill. You wouldn't have built the bridge otherwise. And then the bottom detail, you see that that small road at the end of the bridge goes into something that looks like a mill race. So my guess was there was a mill there. Some of the other clues, as you see on both sides of the in that area, both sides of the creek, there's Kennedy's. Thomas Kennedy, who was a railroad guy, railroad executive on the Guilford side, and Joseph Kennedy, who was on the Hamilton side. And this region was known as Kennedy Flats. It was actually a recreational region for Chambersburg. Another clue, if you look at the bottom one there, is upstream from where that supposed mill location was, is a brickyard, and that amounts to be an important clue I'll discuss later on. So, not having found that grist mill on the 1868 atlas, I looked at an earlier map of Franklin County from 10 years before, and you see on this map there is a GM about where that road ended on the supposed mill race. And you see that the land there, actually on both sides of the river, was owned by Judge Kennedy. This area was known as Kennedy Flats. And if you look up the upper right there, there's an ad for Judge James Kennedy's mill. So there was a in 1849. So earlier there was a mill at that location. We also know that later on there was somewhere in the Kennedy Flat area there was a water-powered gun or blasting powder mill, and that only lasted for a few years. So we have indications there were mills in the area. The question was the Hamilton mills at those locations. As with other mills, I searched newspapers for information about the Hamilton mills, and I found no connection between the Kennedy mill and the Hamilton mills. I did find this chain of ownership for Hamilton mills that ran from the 1860s up to 1920, but I found nothing that linked the Kennedy mill with the Hamilton mills. I did look at the series of Sanborn fire insurance maps, which included Hamilton mills, and they gave some information which indicates it's not the same site as the Kennedy mills. In particular, if you notice, the mill itself is very close to Conococheague Creek. The mill has a very short head race, which is different than where I think the Kennedy mill was, which would be much farther down on the mill race. Also, there's no need for a bridge to cross the creek and come to the mill because there's a road that runs from the west in Hamilton Township that reaches the mill. An important clue is the high ground shown to the left of this detail from the Sanborn map, and I believe that high ground is a bluff that's in the area now, and the bluff runs south of the lowland where the mill would have been, and runs along what I think is that mill race for the Kennedy mill. So that kind of anchors the mill upstream from a bluff in the high ground. That's an important clue. Here are a couple more Sanborn fire insurance maps from later dates. The one on the left shows the mill, shows the road a little better, shows the high ground that's south of the road. And then it shows a brickyard. So this adds another clue that the mill was near a brickyard and on the same road that led to the mill. To the right is the 1931 map, and here you see the area where the mill was, but the mill is gone. So we know the mill was gone by 1931. Eventually, the borough of Chambersburg bought up land in the Kennedy Flats area to put in a sewer line and a sewage treatment plant. In this modern map here, the small circles show where the sewage treatment plant is now. And the road that runs across the creek and goes to it is now called Dump Road. Apparently it was a dump road for the town in that area. And to the south of where that dump road comes in is now a borough park, I think Pinewood Parks, I believe. To the north of that dump road is private land owned by the knitter houses, and to the west of the mill race or whatever is land owned by the borough for the sewage treatment plant and the dump. I wanted to walk along the mill race there to see what kind of ruins might be there, and so I contacted the park department, and a fellow named Guy Schulz got permission for us to walk on the borough land to see what was there, and we did that. We walked along it, and the best ruins we saw was where the dump road crosses the mill race, and there are stone walls on each side, and I believe that probably was where the Kennedy mill was. So, but as you recall, the Hamilton Mills detail showed it being very close to the Conococheague Creek, so we walked along the creek on the mill race up to the creek to see if there was any old foundations there. And by the time we got up to the creek, the bluff became very close to where the mill race was. In fact, the land on the west side of the mill race near the creek was too high to be a site for a mill. So we did find some concrete there, but I think it was just dumped there. So that kind of left us with a mystery. Where was this Hamilton Mills if it wasn't where the Kennedy Mill was? And so, fortunately, later on, Tanya Nitterhouse, who owns land, whose family owns land on both sides of the creek, offered to show me around, which she did. She did with her sister, and we instead of walking on the south side, we walked on the north side of the creek. She showed me something that looked like a dam abutment, and it may or may not have been one, but there's something there man-made that looked a little bit like a dam abutment. And then we worked further upstream along the creek into the area between where Washington Street is shown, and on the other side of the creek would be the Eastland Drive. And when we reached that area, which is now the Nitterhouse Soccer Complex, her sister looked across the creek and says her father or uncle remembered an old brickyard there. So that could sort of tied it together. There was a brickyard near where that Eastland Drive was, and if you recall, the Sanborn maps showed the mills, the Hamilton Mills, as being near a brickyard. So now I believe that was the location along Eastland Drive there of the Hamilton Mills. Now there's nothing there except for houses. This next map shows a region upstream of the last on the east branch of Conococheague Creek. You'll see that there was a high density of mill sites here. I think that was because the mills were near the road leading to Gettysburg and Baltimore, and so they had good transportation to send their flour east to a port. There's no mills that are still standing, but there is this representative, or not quite historically accurate, water wheel that's at the mouth of Falling Spring Creek, where it runs into the East Branch. This waterfall here is over 20 feet. It was the best site of all the sites in the Conococheague area, and there was a lot of mills put here. The first mill was a sawmill and a grist mill made by Benjamin Chambers, the first settler in the area. And there was several grist mills that followed. There was a cotton mill, there was a rag paper mill, and a straw paper mill. And after the whole region was burnt during McCausland's raid during the Civil War, they built a huge woolen mill there, a water-powered woolen mill, and another grist mill called the town mill. Those mills are all fed off a mill race that's away from where the falls are here. So the wheel here is an homage to the mills, but it's not very historically accurate. Back Creek is between the West Branch and the East Branch of Conococheague Creek. It probably should be called the middle branch, but it's called Back Creek. There are 3 mills that are still standing along this creek. Near west of St. Thomas is the Campbell's Run Mill, which is now a American Legion building. Further downstream is Miller's Mill, and right near where Back Creek runs into the East Branch at Williamson is the Williamson Mill. This map shows the West Branch of Conococheague Creek at Fort Loudon and below. In this region, there are 3 mills that are still standing. Just south of Fort Loudon, the town of Fort Loudon, is the Easton Ryder Gish Mill. It's a little bit hard to recognize from the road. It's on Hobbaker Road because it has a building in front of it. But if you look up, you can see the mill. Further downstream, past southeast of Mercersburg, is the remains of the Montgomery Mill. This picture shows the dam still there, and it shows part of the old grist mill. The old grist mill was modified to become an electric power station, and so the upper part's been modified, but the lower part and the dam are still there. And just a little bit further downstream from that mill is the Irwinton Anderson Mill. That mill is in the best shape of all of the mills in the Conococheague region. I took a tour of it in 2015, and they ground some cornmeal in it. The equipment is still there, and I understand it may be for sale if somebody's interested in buying a pretty functional old mill. The first region discussed in my book and the last discussed in this presentation is the West Branch upstream of Fort Loudon. The creek begins in Amberson Valley and runs down through Path Valley on its way to Fort Loudon. Right about where the intersection of those two valleys are is where Hoover Mill is today. Hoover Mill it still has a lot of its original equipment in it, and it's for sale. Further downstream in Fannisburg is the McAllen Mill. The McAllen Mill is now a private residence. Before that, it was a hotel, and before that, it was a grist mill. When I met the owner a few years back, she was wanting to sell that mill. So there's two mills for sale in this region. The upper picture there is the remains of the Van Skyack Mill near Amberson, the town of Amberson. And that was a hard one to find, but and I got it somewhat confused in my first edition of my book, but here it is, what remains of the foundation for that mill. Conococheague Creek, its branches and tributaries had over 100 mill sites where there was water-powered mills. Over 80 of those were grist mills, and of those 80 or so, 8 grist mills are still standing and can be seen. None of those are still operating. In looking at the construction of the grist mills, I found 58 had information on that, either through pictures or through sales advertisements. And of those 58 grist mills, I found that 24 were made of wood frame, 23 were made of limestone blocks, and 13 were made of brick. One thing I found in studying these mills is that the owners and millers often switched around to different mills in the area, and because the mills are often known by the name of the owner or the miller if he leased the mill, sometimes it was challenging to track which mill somebody was talking about. For instance, the Gist family had very many mills in different places, and same with the Lehman family. So that was one of the challenges, is trying to tie the name of a mill and its owner to a specific location. At least 33 mills I found had installed turbines. Most of these had put the turbines in after they had originally had water wheels, but some of the new mills just started with turbines. And of grist mills, I found 30 that switched from millstones to roller mills. And they often were very proud of the roller mills, and they added that roller mills to their name. So there was the Cove Gap roller mills and similar name switches for other mills that added roller mills. The grist mills that survived into the 20th century could no longer compete with the huge flour mills of the Midwest, particularly in Minneapolis. And the Midwest also had these huge wheat fields out there. So in this area, the grist mills in the 20th century, most of them stopped making flour, and most of them switched to making either cornmeal and or animal feed. Fire was an issue in mills. I found at least 25 had burned down. A few of them had burned down more than once. And mills also were dangerous places. In contrast to the image we may have be an idyllic, peaceful place where people swam and ice skated or whatever. There were several drownings within the mill races. And inside the mill, the machinery there killed a number of millers. The millers would get their clothing caught in a cogwheel and just to be either mangled to death or injured badly. So the mills were indeed dangerous places. So that's my presentation on the historic mills along Conococheague Creek and its tributaries. I showed you a few sample mills, and I indicated what mills you could still see. If you want to get more information on the specific mills I mentioned, or of the 100 or so other mills of all types in that area. Or if you just want to get general information about mill design and the agriculture markets and transportation in this area, I suggest you get and read a copy of my book. It should be copies at the library, but you can also pick up a free copy of the book at the Franklin County Visitors Bureau in Chambersburg, or you can call them and they'll send you the book. And if you just want to see what the book looks like, there's a URL at the bottom there where you can go into their website, and if you go under publications, they have the book there online.